Hey everybody. Uh doesn't look there we go. Hey everybody. We're gonna watch the first 45 seconds of this video and then we're gonna talk about it, alright?
Well, howdy there, Internet people. It's Bo again. So, today we are going to talk about what President Biden said in regards to Ukraine and the long term effects if Ukraine loses and what it means for the United States. Because he was very direct in that statement and it caused a whole lot of questions to come in. And mainly, the question is this hyperbole? No, it's not. If you missed it, the president said that if Ukraine fails and Russia succeeds, that the United States might be drawn into a war. Yeah. Yes. That is a very real possibility. It's not an immediate thing.
Alright, cool. So now we got that preface. Here's my explanation as to why America would be drawn into war. We wouldn't be drawn into a war with Russia for at least a decade. So the reason I say that is because Russia's going to want to consolidate, gain back its strength, and then it's going to try again. And in that time, its control over Ukraine would give it over a couple things. So this is Ukrainian resistance is broken. Ukraine is now a part of the Russian Federation. A part of the Russian Empire. It is now subservient to Russia. Okay, so ignoring all of the atrocities and cultural erasure that Russia would commit against the Ukrainians, let's talk about why because the United States isn't going to invade anybody for that shit. We piss on our own citizenry plenty without having to do any of that. Why would this happen? Two reasons. One, Ukraine is a very mineral resource heavy nation, has lots of resources. I think it's probably like one of the largest countries in Europe, period. And second, it has been called the world's breadbasket. If you recall, in the early days of Russia's invasion, one of the things that Russia would do is it basically made it so like all of the grain shipments were not able to get out of the country and kind of stopped grain production in Ukraine by and large. Why did they do this? Well, to mount international pressure, because there are a lot of countries that are in places that do not have the environment to grow the amounts of food needed to sustain their populations. So a lot of North African countries, a lot of East Asian countries, and this also includes countries that just are completely dependent on foreign imports of food, like Sri Lanka at this point. So that was to tighten the screws on the international community. And what would happen over the 10 years of Russians annexation of Ukraine would be the continue would be the a relative would basically be Ukraine has been a huge source of food and stuff for a lot of parts of Europe too, and it would really be a disturbance. A lot of resources come from Ukraine that go into Europe. It's one of the places that one of the outsider nations that is a huge supplier of insider nations. And what would end up happening is that Russia would eventually start annexing other members that aren't a part of NATO, but are maybe a part of the EU. And lastly, Russia would prevent the export of goods in needed in grain and all sorts of other important things needed to the countries that were not supportive of, or that were not friendly to Russia during this time. So it would mean a lot of people would suffer, and a lot of people would suffer both economically, like monetarily, personally. People would go hungry. People would starve. Europe is still struggling to get its own energy independence from Russia. It's part of the reason why Russia was able to annex Crimea the way it was. Is while the UK might have been vehemently against it, places like France and Germany kind of gave tacit rebukes of it, but didn't do anything more than that. Because why? Both France and Germany, two of the largest member states of the EU, and who again hold the most amount of sway in a lot of ways, Germany especially, were dependent on Russian oil, and so a lot of the countries that were not energy independent in that regard were essentially, not didn't that's why there wasn't enough international condemnation to actually do anything about it, because a lot of countries were dependent on that gas and oil, and a lot of countries still are dependent on that gas and oil. There's a reason why some countries make vocal demonstrations of being against Russia's invasion, and others are just quietly not saying anything. With Ukraine being taken over, the exports of fuel and stuff that Ukraine has been doing to other countries would stop, and as well as any grain shipments. And what would end up happening is that the United States would effectively, geopolitically have to step in. And do I want them to step in a situation like that? Not particularly. I don't want to send people to go fight and die in a war. But the fact of the matter is that, as Bo says repeatedly on his channel, geopolitics is about power coupons. It's a big game of poker where everybody's cheating and nobody cares about your feelings. At the end of the day, the United States has the level of power, money, and influence that it does because it is willing to bully other people into compliance and defend our allies, when they come asking for help. And that's just what we would probably end up doing. Sorry. So we would probably end up going into a war because, at the end of the day, Russia's tightening the screws on our European, African, and East Asian allies would probably be enough pressure from our allies to make us do something. No, did I say Biden? I don't know. Whatever. Biden's not in office at that point. But I'm tired. Point is that whoever the president's going to be is going to have to make that call. And at the end of the day, it's been we still have some active wars in the Middle East, but even with the constant deprioritization of that, I think conflict with Russia, if Ukraine, this is what, Ukraine has to win, because if Ukraine wins the conflict, then that means Russia is effectively made inert, at least for the next 20, 30 years. Unless Putin decides, fuck it, we ball, and just decides to nuke the planet. Because if they lose, then we're going to be spending a lot more money to fight wars 10 years from now, and all of the cute little Gen Alpha kids who we make jokes about not being able to read are not going to be able to fucking see or breathe either, because we'll send them to fight and die in a fucking war. Is what it is. All right, that was kind of what I want to talk about with Biden. Biden's comment of hey, if Ukraine loses and Russia wins, we're eventually gonna be at war with Russia and shit. I wanted to explain that. So have a good rest of your day, everybody. I just realized that I recorded a 30-minute video earlier today on Skyrim mods, and there's no sound in the fucking video, and I want to shoot myself. So have a good day.